So now we have been talking about microscopy so far, optical microscopy, and we have started looking at an aspect called quantitative metrography or quantitative microscopy. When you say quantitative microscopy, I said quantifying the microstructural features. When I say quantifying the microstructural features, we say it is, let's say, any microstructural feature for that matter, whether it is grain size or particle size or particle shapes and anything related to the shapes, and also what is called the amount of the phases. Whenever I am talking of a precipitation hardened alloy, I know the strength of the precipitation hardened alloy depends on what parameters? Can somebody tell me? Anyone? Raise your hands, I'll ask you. I have an aluminum copper alloy, precipitation hardened. The hardness of this alloy depends on what? Cohesive strength. Anything more? I do not deny it. But any, yes? Size of the precipitates. Anything more? Only that? Please sit down. Number of precipitates. If I can translate it, I would say the fraction of the precipitates. The volume fraction. Anything else? Size, fraction, shape, okay. Anything else? I want to get everything. I am talking of room temperature strength, hardness. What temperature you are talking? Yeah, of course, I understand, definitely. But we are talking of room temperature hardness. Okay. So room temperature hardness of this depends on one more thing, at least one more. What is that? The type of the precipitate. When I say type of the precipitate, I mean, for example, in the precipitation hardening of aluminum copper alloys, we talk about various sequence of precipitation. What is that sequence? You tell me. GP Jones. And then what next? After GP Jones, theta double prime, theta prime, and then theta. Right? Each of them will have certain different features. What feature I mean? It basically have different surface energies, interfacial energies with the matrix. Okay? The interfacial energy of each of these precipitate with the matrix is different. And as a result, we define them or classify them as different types of precipitates. There are three types of precipitates that people talk about. Have you heard of this? What are these three types? Related to the surface energy. In relation to surface energy, all precipitates are classified as three types. What are these three types? If you have heard about precipitation hardening, you should have come across this. What are those three types? Coherent, semi-coherent, and incoherent. Right? Yes. So that also matters. Because, for example, if you remember aging curve, hardness as a function of aging time, you see there is a peak. And the peak is achieved when you have one particular type of a precipitate. Right? Which are usually a semi-coherent precipitates. And when the precipitates become incoherent, and the strength again falls, the hardness falls. When you get theta, then hardness falls. Right? So that means there is another parameter in addition to the size of the precipitates and the volume fraction of the precipitates, what is called the type of the precipitate, nature of the precipitate. Whether it is a coherent precipitate or a semi-coherent precipitate or an incoherent precipitate, that also influences the thing. Of course, that in an optical microscope I cannot see. Whether the interface is coherent or semi-coherent or not. What is the meaning of coherent precipitate? Anybody can tell me? What is the meaning of coherent precipitate? What is this coherency? The word coherency means what? Raise your hands, I'll ask. Yes, what is coherency? What is the meaning of coherency? You have heard this word. But then you should know what it is. Yes, tell me. Yes, you have some answer. I want what? Matching. Yes. What do you mean by this matching? Is it marriage matching bureau? Okay. Somebody who wants to elaborate it a little more on this matching? Yes, it is matching. I understand. What is this? When do you say that it is coherent? Yes, if the particles are mingled with the matrix. Okay. You have said the same thing in a different fashion. Yes, anything more? None of these statements are wrong. I'm not saying that. But the definitions have to be crisp. Definitions have to be really sharp. Otherwise there is ambiguity. That's a problem. So when you say matching, what she means, we say that the atomic planes have to be continuous across the interface. If I say a particle and I talk about certain atomic plane, whatever it is, let's say 1, 1, 1 plane, and if there is a matrix, and if these the planes in the matrix are also having similar d-spacing, interplanar spacing, such that there is a continuity across the interface of the atomic planes, then we call it as a perfect matching. Then we call it as a coherent interface. When do we call it not so coherent interface? When the d-spacing of a particular plane, let's say 1, 1, 1 plane, is different when compared to here. Then what happens? Then what happens is this. For example, let's say this is my matrix and I have a particle with a different d-spacing. For example, this kind of a d-spacing. Now what you see that these planes cannot have a complete matching. Some of them will have matching, some of them will not have matching. And wherever there is no matching, for example, let's say this plane is matching with this, let's say, okay, and this plane is not able to match, whereas this plane is closer, so it may slightly bend and then have a matching. And let's say this plane is able to match and this plane is able to match, but this plane is not able to match. Then what happens? Wherever there is no matching, it is like a dislocation. That you have a plane of atoms above, there is no plane of atoms below. Or there are plane of atoms below, but there are no plane of atoms above. So you get dislocations at the interface. These are called misfit dislocations. Because these dislocations are happening because of a misfit of the atomic planes. Atomic planes are not able to continue across the interface. And such a interface is called what is called a semi-coherent interface. And it is, I'm showing a slightly exaggerated situation. There may be a situation where all the planes are able to match because of a small difference. But because of that small difference, there is a distortion at the interface. The planes are slightly distorted at the interface. And as a result, there may be a certain strain here. Though there are no dislocations, okay, the number of planes in a particular distance and the number of planes in a particular distance here are very close to each other. And as a result, no dislocations are forming. But because of the matching that is forced on it, then there is a bending of the planes. And then you get what is called coherency strains. And because of this coherency is at the atomic level, you cannot see it in an optical microscope. Okay? Optical microscope, you know the resolution is only 100 nanometers or 200 nanometers. These are all at atomic level. Okay? Right? The distance between any of these two is maybe a few angstroms only. Right? So you will not be able to see this. So you need to go to a microscope where you can see this. For example, an electron microscope. And where you will actually see dislocations at the interface. And then say, yes, this is semi-coherent. And if the matching is too bad, for example, the crystal structure of this precipitate and the crystal structure of matrix do not match each other at all. One is FCC, another is orthorhombic. Let's say Al2Cu. Al2Cu is what crystal structure it is? Anybody knows? Orthorhombic? Sure? Okay, I accept. Possibly it is tetragonal. Anyway, I may be wrong. Okay, whatever is that structure. But definitely it is not same as that of the aluminum. Aluminum is the matrix which is FCC. So as a result, Al2Cu cannot have a matching. Any planes in the Al2Cu cannot have a perfect matching with any one of the planes in the FCC. It is not that always you need to have exactly the same crystal structure. Sometimes some planes of a particular crystal structure can have some similarity with some planes of a different crystal structure. If I can give you an example, FCC and HCP, if you consider, there is one plane in FCC which has exactly a similar packing with one plane in a HCP. What are those? Can somebody tell me? There is one plane in an FCC whose packing inside the plane is exactly similar to a plane in a HCP. Yes, tell me. 110 of what? Of FCC. Not confident. 11 of FCC is similar to what of HCP? Anybody who has the answer? What is the crystal, indices for the basal plane in HCP? 111? Basal plane? You said that you have listened to 6 of my lectures. Basal plane in HCP. 1 0 0. Are you sure? So you have almost become like our IIT boys. Something which you have heard, you said your classes started only 2 weeks back, and you told me that you have listened to 6 of my lectures, and then out of the crystal structures was one of them, and definitely I spent one full lecture only on HCP, how to index planes and directions in HCP. We have spent time. And you say that only, sir, if there is a Saturday exam, I will read it only on Friday night. That's it? No, you don't know what is the indices of basal plane. Do you know what I mean by a basal plane? The top and bottom planes of HCP. What are the indices of that? 0, 0, 0, 1. This is called Miller-Bravais indices, 4 indices system. And this, if you look at the atomic arrangement of that atomic arrangement is exactly similar to one plane of FCC. What is that plane? If I want, I will give you what is that atomic arrangement in that basal plane. You will have every one atom surrounded by 6 atoms. That is what is the basal plane, right? Hexagonal kind of. And exactly similar packing you will see in FCC in one plane. It's 1 1 1. It's 1 1 1, the closed packed plane of FCC. If you want, why is that so? I want you to go back and read a book as Callister or something, or Material Science Raghavan. You will see clearly that the packing can be seen, or go to Google, you will be able to see this. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I wanted to say that yes. So if I have an HCP particle and a FCC matrix, I can still have a matching, because that particular 0001 plane of the particle and 111 plane of the matrix can have a matching. In fact, this has been the case when we take aluminum alloys. We do what is called grain refinement of aluminum alloys. If you have ever heard of this, we deliberately, if I want to make aluminum stronger, I want to reduce the grain size, stronger at room temperature. I want to reduce the grain size. In order to reduce the grain size, there are different ways of reducing the grain size. One way is, as you people said some time back, cool it fast. Undercool it, increase the undercooling, increase the nucleation rate, all this. But if I don't want to do cooling fast, I want to cool it in into a sand mold only. But can I still make the grains smaller? We say what is called grain refinement, something called inoculation, if you have come across this word. People add heterogeneous nucleating sites into it. Okay, these are called grain refiners. They add grain refiners. Grain refiners are nothing but particles with a definite crystal structure, whose crystal structure is similar to that of the matrix. That's why I just now said, if gamma sp is lower, then the particle will act as a nucleating site. If I have 2 particles added to it, the one which has a lower gamma sp will act as a better nucleating site when compared to the other. So that's why I was talking to you earlier about transient nucleation. It is possible that if you have 2 types of particles, the particle with the smaller gamma sp, the nucleation will happen first there, and then that starts growing, and simultaneously after some time the liquid may again start solidifying on the other particle. So if you are adding particles with such a structure, and in aluminum the particle that is added is called TiB2, titanium boride, and another particle called Al3Ti. Al3Ti is actually tetragonal in structure, but it is so close to cubic, it almost behaves like a cubic structure, because the C/A ratio is very, very small, and as a result this particle has some similarity in the structure when compared to the aluminum that is nucleating. So if I take a liquid of aluminum, add these particles into it, pour this liquid into a mold, allow it to solidify, each of these particles can act as a nucleating site for the solid to nucleate. So instead of a normal solidification where if you pour a liquid metal into a mold, you have this kind of columnar grains forming, right? First you have chilled grains, small grains here, small grains, and then you have columnar grains, then you have some equiaxed grains. This is how a typical structure is for any casting. Instead, you will get a structure where this whole thing will be fine grains. Because you have added so many particles, each of them has acted as a nucleating site, each of those grains start growing and they touch each other, and then finally a grain structure forms. This is what is called columnar grain structure. This is what is called equiaxed grain structure. So you can convert a grain structure from this to this just by simply adding what are called grain refiners. And there the basic concept is, am I adding a particle whose crystal structure is similar to that of the solid that is nucleating? Then only they will act as nucleating sites, because there is a matching. If this matching is not there, it won't. So all these things can be actually seen, but for that you need to go to a microscope which can show them. Our question now is that the strength depends on all these factors, whether there is coherency at all there or there is no coherency. But as far as optical microscope is concerned, what we are interested, what we can actually measure quantitatively is only the things like, as I just now said, grain size. I can measure the particle size. I can measure the particle volumes. Of course, shapes also can be seen. Can we measure these is the question. And in principle, yes. And there are different ways. For example, grain size is usually measured either as a number in terms of certain size, in terms of certain microns or nanometers or whatever it is, in terms of certain dimension, or given in terms of certain what is called an ASTM number. American Society of Testing of Materials has given certain what are called grain size numbers. And there is a relation in terms of, so if I take a sample and then put it in a microscope and see it at a 100x magnification, and if I see certain n number of grains per square inch, we say that this is related to an equation like this, where n, small n, is called the ASTM grain size number. The capital N is the number of grains per square inch at a 100x magnification. Of course, if you are using a different magnification, you need to multiply with a different factor. And so this is how you can, but this can only give you a certain number. It does not give you the actual size. When I say size, when somebody says my height, I want it in the terms of certain centimeters or something like that. I do not want a number. And group a number of people, like we talk about nowadays grade system, where we say A grade, 90 to 100 is called A grade or S grade or whatever it is. So you are grouping. So people, all those microstructures which have between n of 2 and 3 are either called either 2 or 3, depending on whether you are closer to 2 or closer to 3. But there is nothing in between there, because these are all integer numbers. So you can say ASTM number 1 or ASTM number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. But there cannot be an actual value in terms of the grain size in these things. And people also either measure the number of grains like this by looking at an area with all these grains. Nowadays all these eyepieces are all calibrated, so that in one particular viewing area, if I can somehow count the total number of grains in that area and then find out how many number of grains are there. Of course, there may not be sometimes full grain. There may be a partial grain. The full grain you are not able to see, only partially. So that is considered either partial of that, let's say half of the grain or something like that. So once you find out all this number of grains and put that into this and see this equation, then you will get a certain number. And that n is what is called ASTM so and so number. So whenever I say ASTM number 1 or ASTM number 8, I am saying that 8 means smaller grain size, 1 means bigger grain size. Because the number of grains per unit area are going to be smaller in number as this n goes down. As the n goes up, then the number of grains are larger. If the number of grains are larger, the grain size is smaller. This is one way to quantitatively say, but it is also semi-quantitative only, not really quantitative, because I am not giving a exact grain size as a grain diameter or something like that. And this is one way. People also compare the actual, I see a microstructure, do not do any counting. I simply take a photograph of that microstructure, compare with standard charts. If you have gone to your metallography lab, possibly they would have put a chart where what is ASTM grain size 1, grain size 2 and 3 and 4 or so. How many grains are possible? So compare with that and say, okay, this is closer to 2 or closer to 4 or whatever it is. This is how people, most of the industry fellows do this. But as an academician, I would like to get a correct number for it. So for that, we use a different technique, what is called no comparison techniques. It is actual measurement technique, which is called linear intercept technique. What I do is, on an eyepiece, in a viewing area, if this is my viewing area, whether it could be square or circular, most of the viewing areas are circular, for example. In that area, I draw a line, many a times even 2 lines. If you see in the eyepiece, you would have seen 2 lines in that, perpendicular to each other. And now if I have my grain size, if this is like this, and another sample with another grain size, I count the number of grains across this. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4. In this length, I have 4 grains. Similarly, I do it in the other direction. And do this on some 10 different regions or 20 different regions, so that I can get a statistical average of the total number of grains in a particular unit length. And this length is known at a 100x magnification. What this length is in terms of microns is known, because this is a calibrated length. So divide that numbers with that length divided by these so many grains, you will actually get the grain size in terms of 5 microns or 2.5 microns, or you exactly get the grain size in terms of a certain dimension, which is in terms of the micron. So this is what we do, a linear intercept method. This is easy if they are all equiaxed. Then what do I do if it is columnar grains? If my grains are all columnar, they are all elongated grains, what do I do? Then what people do is, if we imagine a microstructure, let's say I consider a circular case, for example, let's say you have grains like this. Even you need not have to have columnar grains only in a cast structure. Sometimes if you have a copper which is rolled, you will also have grains, elongated grains, right? So if I have elongated grains, how do I represent the grain size? In a equiaxed grain structure, okay, they are more or less like circular grains. I can say a certain size, and I call this as a grain diameter. In a elongated thing, what do I mean by the size? Is it the width of the size? Is it the length of that size? Is always a question. So what people generally do is, they measure the average length and average width by taking a number of such regions. Once you know the average length and average width, take a square root of average length into average width. So basically you are taking the area of it and taking a square root of the area. Square root of the area can be equated to a particular dimension. It is like equating a rectangular area to a square area. Okay? So in a rectangle you have 2 dimensions, in a square you have only 1 dimension. So I am representing 2 dimensions into 1 single dimension. And this is what we do, and whatever value that you get as a square root of this is given as a grain size. If you want to give simply 1 single number representing that. So in all columnar grain structures, this is what we do, or in all elongated grain structures, this is what we do. All this is finding out a grain size. In addition to grain size, we can also do particle size measurements. Similarly, whenever you have particles, you can measure the particle sizes. And nowadays there are what are called image analysis systems attached to the microscopes, which you possibly might have seen, and where you can actually do these measurements. You can draw a circle around that particular particle and actually measure the grain size. All this can be done. And then the next question comes is, how do I find out the amount of the phase? The moment I say amount of the phase, as I might have talked to you in one of the previous classes, there are different amounts that we talk about. For example, what I see in a microstructure, for example, if I have a microstructure where there are precipitates, circular, spherical precipitates. Spherical or circular, I do not know, because they look circular because I am only seeing a 2D. Right? I am not seeing a 3D here. I am only seeing a 2D, 2-dimensional microstructure. So I have some circles. Okay? And I can differentiate this from this because the contrast is different. This may be black in color, that may, the background may be matrix may be white in color, and from that I can say this is a precipitate, that is a matrix. And from this I can measure certain quantitative information on what is the amount of this precipitate in terms of what is called area fraction, right? What I should do is find out all these areas occupied by these particles over the total area. And in order to get more accurate number, I do this over a number of regions, some 20 different regions or so. Because statistics, the larger the data set, the more accurate you are, more closer to the reality you are in terms of, because we know that the samples, the microstructures are never really uniform. This is a problem always with any quantitative information. If I want to give certain characteristics of this class, I need to pick up the sample correctly. Otherwise, I am not giving the complete characteristics of the class. Similarly, if you want to make an impression about a person, you need to know him more closely, and you should have met him a large number of times. By otherwise, one meeting you decide what his characteristic is. It may be wrong information. So similarly here, you need to have as large a set as possible to be able to, and that's where many a times we face problem, that because if I see one small region, you may see a very fine grain size, and I slightly move the sample to some other region, I may see a very large grain size, because the grain sizes could be inhomogeneous. Maybe I am seeing something which is very close to the surface periphery of the casting, where my grain sizes are very fine, and if I go interior, grains have become columnar in nature, I suddenly see a large grain size. So similarly, I may have different inhomogeneous grain sizes inside the material, and as long as there are inhomogeneous microstructures, it is very difficult to quantify them. You need to get some average number, but you may know pretty well that this average may not mean everything. And that's the reason why whenever you give an average, you also have to always give what is called the standard deviation from the average. And the standard deviation tells you how narrow is your grain size distribution is, or how wide your grain size distribution is. It is possible that your grains are all having a distribution like this, or your grains are all having a distribution like this. What I mean is the number of grains versus grain size. Number of grains versus grain size, if I plot, you may have a very sharp distribution, or you may have a very broad distribution. Okay, and this is what is decided by that. This is what is characterized by that standard deviation. If the standard deviation, if I say my grain size is 2 micron plus or minus 0.01 micron, or if I say it is 2 micron plus or minus 2 micron, I would say that the second one is not going to be very accurate measurement, right? So possibly because there is so much of inhomogeneity inside. Okay, the grain sizes are not homogeneous, whereas the first case I can say yes, this is not just plus or minus. Okay, and that's why whenever you talk about grain sizes, people nowadays say, do you know what is the standard deviation of that? Not only just to get the actual average, you need to get the standard deviation. And this is what, if I look at it, this is my area fraction. I get it from a number of things. I find out the average area fraction. But is this, can it give me a complete information? No. Because what is more important in any material is what is the volume fraction of the particles rather than the area fraction. Okay, because a material has a volume. Okay, it's a solid material. But inside the solid material you have the particles distributed, like suspended inside a medium. And now what you are showing is only a section of that. And is this section giving you a complete information of the whole solid or not, is a question. That is where there is a lot of I would say research that has gone in. How do I connect this 2D information to the 3D information contained in the material? This is what people call it as stereology. There is a new field or stereo microscopy, people call it as. So getting the 3D information, and people for easy sake, they assume that area fraction is equal to volume fraction, and this is possible when you have precipitates which are more or less spherical in nature. this assumption is reasonably okay. And if there is a uniform distribution of these precipitates, of reasonably uniform in size, and for example, if there are very big particles and there are very few very small particles also, and the region where I am seeing may have only big particles in one region, another region may have very few particles, very small particles, then this may not be correct. But at the same time, because I am seeing a large number of regions getting an average area fraction, then that average area fraction can be equated to average volume fraction, provided the particles are spherical in nature. But if the particles are elongated in nature, then this is not true. If the particles are elongated in nature, depending on how my sectioning is, am I putting it parallel to the particle or perpendicular to the particle, I see different shapes. If elongated particles, let's say rod-like particles, and I section it like this, I look at them as spherical particles. If I section it like this, I look at them as elongated needle-like particles. And depending on which section I am looking at, I will see different things. So can I do the same thing? There are geometric calculations which people do regularly in order to connect these things. To get that, you need to have various sections taken from the sample. In fact, what people do is they take section layer by layer microstructures, build all these layers into a software, and from that find out what is the actual volume fraction. People do what is now people regularly call it as tomography, which is basically looking at the 3D image of the particles. How do I do? I simply take a material and polish it and look at the microstructure first. Then what I do, I again polish it a little more, remove a few micron layer, again see the microstructure. Keep on doing it more and more. Section it, okay, slice it. Keep removing certain thickness of the sample, and I do this again and again, and stitch all these layers together in a software, in a graphics, and then I will be able to see whether these particles are, what is the shape of the particle, are they really spherical, are they elongated. I may be seeing them as circular, but they may not be actually spherical. So all this information can be obtained by doing such kind of tomography and stereology, and a lot of people have worked on that and gave equations which correlate the area fractions to volume fractions. But there also the story does not end there, because if I want to correlate this to my phase diagram, my lever rule, I have difficulties. Why? Because my lever rule from a phase diagram, for example, somebody said today morning that if I take a perlite, if I find out percentage of ferrite and percentage of cementite in a perlite, they said 1/8, 8:1. This is what somebody said. So that means approximately 88% of this and 12% of this. What percentage is this? What percentage? It is not composite. Please remember, that is something which all of you should know. Composition is different from amount of phase. Please try to know. For example, if this is my alloy, aluminum copper alloy, and this is Al2Cu, and this is alpha. The composition of alpha is the amount of copper inside the alpha. That is the meaning of composition of alpha, and which is usually very, very small, less than 0.5% or so at room temperature at least. Okay, and the Al2Cu, when I say composition, it has certain percentage, 33% of atomic percent. If I convert it into weight percent, it gets something like 55% or so. That is what we mean by a composition. Composition means the concentration of elements inside a particular phase is called composition. But when I say amount of the phase, it is the total volume fraction, volume percentage in a given volume. How much volume is occupied by a phase number 1 and how much volume is occupied by phase number 2 is what is called the fraction. And are these two connected? Yes, they are connected, because if the whole lever rule comes from there. If I use lever rule, I say that alloy composition, if I call it as C0, C0 can be given as F alpha into C alpha plus F beta into C beta. This is what is the basis of lever rule. What is these two? F means fraction. Fraction of alpha and fraction of beta. And we know one more equation to connect this. What is the second equation to be used for in order to derive the lever rule? If I want to find out the amount of alpha, amount of beta, F alpha, F beta, I have two parameters. Two parameters if I want to find out, I need two equations. One single equation cannot give me two parameters. What is the second equation? Nobody has told you how to derive lever rule. If I take this, let's say I take a aluminum copper alloy. This is the theta phase. This is the composition of theta and this is alpha. So if I take an alloy here, this alloy, if I call the composition of this alloy as C naught, this alloy at room temperature has what? What does it contain inside the microstructure? At room temperature, that alloy? Aluminum copper phase diagram, have you seen? Yes, you have seen. So tell me, what does it show at room temperature? What does it contain? That particular alloy. You have an answer? Tell me, what does it? Anybody? I have already said this is theta. And if you want, I will also say that this is alpha. Now tell me, what should that alloy contain? Theta plus alpha. What is so difficult in this? This is all alpha plus theta region. Don't you know how to label phase diagrams? So this is all alpha plus theta. So this particular alloy. Now if I consider this alloy C1, C2, what is the this alloy C1 alloy? What will it contain in its microstructure? Alpha plus theta. C0, C2. Then what is the difference? The amount of alpha and theta are going to be different because their compositions are different. So this is only alloy composition. Now, if this alloy has alpha and theta, what is the alpha composition? What is the theta composition? This is the alpha composition. This is C alpha. This is the theta composition. This is C theta. The composition of alpha, whether you choose a C1 alloy or C2 alloy, C0 alloy, all these alloys will show only a microstructure like this. The only difference is the amount of these black patches will be different. If you consider theta as a black patch inside a white matrix, the black patches amounts will be different. But the composition of the black patch and the composition of the white region will be the same. If I have a way to find out the composition of each of these, do you know there is a technique which can give you the composition of each of these? We are going to talk about that in materials characterization, but I want to know how much of GK you have. If you have read a little beyond your class, have you ever heard of a technique by which I can find out the composition of this theta phase, the composition of this alpha phase? By some technique. Gravimetry will not give you that. I'm sorry. Gravimetry will only give you the composition of the overall alloy. But I have two phases. For example, I have an alloy like this. I measure the hardness of the alloy. Okay? I get the hardness of the whole alloy. But I want to know the hardness of the Al2Cu and the hardness of alpha. What should I do? Is there any technique which can give me only the hardness of alpha and only the hardness of theta? Have you gone through a course called mechanical testing? Yes? Yes, you have gone through all of them. But nothing is there inside. Right? Is that so? What is that mechanical test which can give me the hardness? What is that hardness test which can give me the hardness of alpha separately and the hardness of theta separately? Have you heard of micro hardness testing? So there are what are called micro hardness testers, where the indentation is very small. The reason why indentation is very small is because the load that you use is very small. People use, in a normal Vickers hardness tester, you use a 3 kg load or a 1 kg load. There are micro hardness testers where we use 10 gram, 100 gram loads. And now we have what are called nano indentation techniques. They are called nano indenter, which will cost almost a crore. And there you use loads as small as fractions of grams. few microgram load. Okay, and when you use that kind of a thing, then your indentation also will be very small. When the indentation is very small, the indentation will be only inside the particle. Okay, the indentation will not cover the particle and the matrix both. Then you will know only the hardness of the particle. Of course, there are also still problems, okay, that maybe the particle gets pushed down, so there is a matrix which is supporting that. There are issues there, but one can get a rough idea. Okay, the hardness. So this is what we call it as micro hardness test. So similarly, I can also find out the composition of only the Al2Cu, the composition of only the alpha. There are techniques which are called spectroscopy techniques. We will talk about them as we go along. We are now talking about microscopy. After the microscopy, we will go to the next topic a little later, which is called spectroscopy. Because when I say characterization of material, I mean characterization of everything. I need to know the structure of this material. I need to know the microstructure of the material. I also need to know the composition of the material. Because all these things will influence the properties of my material. Right? So I also need to know the composition of the material. Not only the composition of the overall material, I also need to know the composition of individual phases also. So that I will know whether there is a intermetallic particle in the middle of a matrix or not. So we will talk about this as we go along. Now the question is, all these things have the same different compositions, and because they have different compositions, the fractions of these alpha beta are different. And that's why all this is connected by one single equation, which says the alloy composition is connected to this. That means what? If I take an alloy with 4% copper in it, the 4% copper inside the alloy is distributed between both alpha and theta. Here I will not call it as beta, let us call it as theta, because this is aluminum copper alloy. And the copper inside the theta is more, copper inside the alpha is less. In one case, the copper content is more than 4%. In the other case, the copper content is less than 4%. But the overall copper content of the alloy is 4%. Okay? And that 4% is distributed between these two in such a way that is F alpha into C alpha. What does F alpha and C alpha tell you? It tells you the total number of copper atoms inside the alpha. So much volume of alpha is there. Each unit volume of alpha contains of so many copper atoms. And if I multiply with the total volume of alpha, I will know how many copper atoms are there inside the alpha. Similarly, if I know that each unit volume of theta contains so many atoms of copper, if I multiply with the total volume of theta, I will know the total number of copper atoms inside the theta. And this plus this should be able to be equated to the total number of copper atoms inside the alloy. It is like your father distributing his money to his children. Okay, so the copper atoms inside the alloy are distributed between both alpha and theta. No atoms can be destroyed or created. We all know this. This is what is called conservation of mass. So once there are certain number of copper atoms inside the alloy, they have to be distributed between these two phases. Because other than these two phases, there is nothing else inside this material. There is only alpha, there is only theta. So some copper atoms go into alpha, some copper atoms go into theta, and this equation will tell me that. And to solve the F alpha and F theta, I need to use one more equation. What is the second equation? The second equation is F alpha plus F theta is equal to how much? Is equal to 1. Because in the whole volume, okay, the fraction of alpha plus fraction of theta is equal to 1, right? Because in the alloy there is nothing else. Whether I choose this alloy or this alloy or this alloy, in all of them, the alpha plus theta is equal to 100%. And this percentage has to be not confused between the percentage of copper atoms inside the alloy. One is composition, another is fraction. Okay? You can say 20% of alpha is there, 30% of alpha is there. That percent of alpha is only a fraction of the phase. Now when we are talking of fraction of phase, that is where the question comes, whether we are talking of volume fraction or area fraction or some other fraction. When you solve these two equations, you get an equation for F alpha and F theta, F alpha and F theta, when you solve these two put together. Because what I do is, I know that f alpha equal to 1 minus f theta. I put 1 minus f theta in the place of f alpha, and I can solve the equation. And then I know what is the f theta is equal to. Similarly, I know what is f alpha equal to. For example, f theta is equal to, if I know a particular alloy with certain, this is C alpha, this is C theta, and f theta is equal to C naught minus C alpha by C theta minus C alpha. And similarly, if you want to know f of alpha equal to C theta minus C naught divided by C theta minus C alpha. This one, which you regularly use in your lever rule calculations, always comes actually from these two equations. Do not simply accept everything that your teacher tells. This is something you have to learn if you want to really understand a subject. Okay? Find out, how did this come, sir? Okay? You are giving me an equation. Where does it come from? And it comes from this. This is the mass balance equations. The two mass balance equations will give you this. And with this, I will be able to find out. And this amount that you are talking about, what you find out f alpha and f theta, are actually weight fractions, weight percentage. Why weight percent? Because the C naught, C theta, C alpha, these are all weight percentages. And as a result, the fraction that I am calculating is also weight percent. And this weight percent is different from this, what I am seeing in the microstructure. In a microstructure, I am only seeing area percent, and the area percent can be converted into percent. And this volume percent and weight percent are two different things. But we can connect these two. We will talk about this in the next.